I was thinking to myself that we've covered on this channel a fair number of, shall we say, undemonstrated language family theories. But then it occurred to me, just what are the craziest language family proposals that have ever been published? And to me, that sounds like a great video idea. So, hello everyone and welcome. This is Learn Hittite, and today I'm going to present to you my bronze, silver and gold, my top 3 craziest, wildest, most spurious language family proposals that I've ever come across. Let's get stuck into it. Now, there are many language family proposals out there whose genetic relationships aren't demonstrated sufficiently in the literature. In fact, if you pick up Lyle Campbell's book on historical linguistics, you can see a whole list of them. Or you could check out any number of videos I've made on this channel covering proposals like Proto-Pontic or Proto-Indo-European Eoskarian, for example. Now, the gold standard for a language family proposal in linguistics is for its legitimacy to reach a consensus amongst specialists. Take Indo-European, for example. Even though there are some scholars, like Jean-Paul Demoule, for example, who are critical of how its history has been reconstructed, the existence of the language family itself is more or less universally accepted among specialists, with a vast body of research behind it from hundreds, if not thousands of researchers over the years. Now, the reason scholars by and large accept the Indo-European proposal is that the relatedness of Indo-European languages can be demonstrated rigorously through the application of the comparative method. Additionally, it falls within a realistic timescale for study, and we can reconstruct downstream branches of the family like Proto-Germanic, Proto-Anatolian or Proto-Romance with varying degrees of confidence. And over the past few years, we can bring in more supporting evidence from related fields like archaeology, genetics, and even mythology to help us flesh out the Indo-European picture. On the other side of the spectrum, we have proposals put forward that don't stand on any kind of recognised methodology. They might claim that they do, but in reality it's either a poor or even manipulated interpretation of what good should look like. Quite often, though not always, there's some pseudo-nationalistic stance lurking behind such proposals.
Sachi propose that the Homeric dictionary is more tied to Albanian words rather than Greek.
For me, there are also some more nefarious proposals. These are ones where a researcher takes advantage of their academic recognition they may have earned in a completely unrelated field to lever their spurious language family ideas into mainstream publications or journals. That, in turn, gives the proposals an undeserved layer of authenticity, one that might not get picked up on by people who aren't more established in the field of linguistics. And in fact, all of the following spurious language family proposals I'm going to mention are guilty of this to some extent. So, with all that in mind, let's get stuck into it. Here are my top 3 spurious language family proposals, starting with the bronze medal position, Salvatore Dedola's Sumerian Babylonian proposal. The author in question here lives in Sardinia, I believe, and publishes his work through a local publishing house. As far as I can tell, it's not peer-reviewed. I'm not entirely sure of the gentleman's academic background, but I do in fact believe he's a trained linguist. The sheer number of works the author has put out is quite large, and he has appeared at various meetings, events and seminars promoting his ideas. He also runs a YouTube channel, though most of his content there, and actually also in print, isn't actually in English. He publishes mainly in Italian, and to be honest, no matter what language you encounter his work in, it's pretty hard to get your head around exactly what he's trying to say. His writing is very dense, to say the least. His proposal, as far as I can tell, is pretty out there, and the only reason it takes third spot rather than ranking higher is that, as far as I can tell, it hasn't really managed to wiggle its way into any recognised academic publications. That is, I haven't seen his work in any peer-reviewed journals. That said, I have come across his theories being discussed by others in publications that were peer-reviewed. Admittedly, they discuss the author's proposals usually in a critical way, but still the proposals are there. Now, what are Didola's proposals exactly? Well, on Reddit, one poster labelled it Sardo-Babylonian, but that name doesn't quite capture the full nature of the author's work. Some journalists have actually coined the proposal as Pan-Mediterranean, but I'm just going to stick with calling it Sumero-Babylonian. Essentially, he proposes that all human language originates from one proto-language in the Nile Delta. The root of this hypothesis is therefore essentially a proto-world one in nature, and while this in itself isn't necessarily outrageous, he just doesn't provide any evidence to support this claim. The real next level of spuriousness comes from the fact that Didola throws out traditional reconstruction methods, like how you might see linguists attempt to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European or Proto-Uralic forms, for example. Actually, he seems to have a real problem with how linguists use asterisks to indicate reconstructed forms which are not directly attested. He essentially revolts against these, what he calls created terms, which in a sense, of course, they are, but that's only if you forget what they're actually meant to represent and the methodology we use to reconstruct these terms. Proto-language reconstructions are just tools. They're not intended to reflect a perfect reality or historical fact. This idea, however, seems to be completely lost on the author, which is strange because even though his work is incredibly hard to process and digest, there is definitely a linguist there. Now, whatever training this author has, he clearly rejects whatever he was taught. Instead, the author believes that there is no need to reconstruct individual vocabulary items, nor in fact is there any need for the construction of language families like Indo-European or the Semitic language family. In fact, Didola completely rejects the Indo-European hypothesis in its entirety. The author instead sees a very flat branching under his proto-world Nile Delta language and claims that very old attested languages like Akkadian and Sumerian can be used pretty much to translate every term in any Eurasian language, from Sardinian to Gothic, for example. Now, Gothic is traditionally placed in the Germanic branch of Indo-European and Sardinian in the Romance branch. But no, here the author sees both of these languages as direct daughters of his Nile Delta proto-language, both of which, alongside other languages, are decipherable by a combination of Akkadian or Sumerian dictionaries. Now, the end result of this endeavour is just a few chance similarities and, of course, grossly stretched meanings of various terms. And very often we end up with just cryptic etymologies, which in many ways seem in no way related to the Akkadian or Sumerian terms they're supposed to come from. Oh, and by the way, it's worth pointing out that Akkadian and Sumerian are not related at all. At least there's no established connection anyway in the literature. Akkadian is a group of Semitic languages and Sumerian is an isolate. What Didola does have is a complete lack of evidence, and his ideas are about as far away from academic consensus as you can get. It's possible that a few of his etymologies might just happen to be right. Semitic and European languages have been in contact for a very long time, but that would be down to chance and ordinary borrowing and not a systematic use of any recognised methodology. I've not actually done an independent video on Dodola's proposals, but with a little bit of Googling, you can find his work and, of course, his YouTube channel and investigate what he has to say for yourselves. Now, the silver medal goes to the Usko-Mediterranean language hypothesis. So this proposal has been put together by a couple of immunologists, not professional linguists. The authors have published widely across different fields and have somehow managed to get this proposal through peer review and into some reasonably decent journals, picking up a worryingly large number of citations by other researchers in the process. So what's the actual claim here? Well, the central idea behind the Usko-Mediterranean claim is that Basque isn't a lone isolate, as traditionally thought, but rather the surviving branch of a much bigger language family coined Usko-Mediterranean. This hypothetical family would have included, amongst other languages, Iberian, Etruscan, Minoan, Hittite, Berber, and a handful of other languages around the Mediterranean basin. In the author's view, these aren't just typologically similar or influenced by contact, they are treated as being genetically related, all going back to a single common ancestor. Now, if trying to group all of those languages together wasn't eyebrow-raising enough, methodologically, this is where things take a lunge into the realm of fantasy science, and boy, they lunge really far, really quickly. Instead of course, demonstrating regular sound correspondences or attempting to reconstruct a single proto-language, the authors rely mostly on word list comparisons and surface similarities. They also point out to shared features that all of these languages are supposed to have, like agglutinative morphology, postpositions, and just generally that the overall look and feel of all of these languages is somewhat similar. But as you probably know, typology alone isn't enough to prove common descent. Not that that is what is really going on here anyway. The authors only actually highlight a few shared traits that aren't even present in all of the languages. Like many who put forward these kinds of spurious genetic connections between languages, the authors make sure to label the existing and extensive body of linguistic research, say for example on the Anatolian or Semitic languages, as false, with their conclusions having been supposedly derived from wrong methodologies. At the same time, of course, they praise their own techniques and conclusions. In fact, they even brand their system as the intuitive methodology, as opposed to the so-called non-intuitive methodology employed by mainstream linguists. It's the arrogant tone throughout that really gets me. The authors are so sure that they're right and that decades of mainstream research has failed, but all of this confidence is built on nothing more than a bunch of words that just look alike. The climax of this comes to when they take a very simple sentence from Hittite, one whose meaning has been completely and intimately understood for well over 100 years. There is literally no debate in the community about what this sentence means. These authors, however, throw away that interpretation of the text, coming up with their own completely wild reading, totally out of context from where this text was actually taken from. Like I said, the arrogance and the ignorance of the authors here really knows no bounds, which is why it takes the silver spot in today's list. I've already done a video on Usko-Mediterranean, so please go and check it out if you would like to learn more. The authors do actually have a book published. I'm not sure how easy or difficult it is to get your hands on this, but if you want an example of what bad looks like in terms of a language family proposal, go and pick this up. Now, I just wanted to say that when choosing the proposal that takes the gold medal, I was really struggling to determine which would actually take the top spot because, this one is pretty wild. And for me, both the gold medal and silver medal positions in the list are equally insane. However, the language family proposal that we're going to look at now, which was put forward by Professor Peter Revesz. The professor came up with what he calls the West Ugric hypothesis, and this is going to be the one that takes the gold medal in my list of spurious language family proposals. Why? Well, the author here ticks all the same boxes you'd expect in a spurious proposal, just as we see with Usko-Mediterranean. There's no consistent or recognised methodology being employed, lots of chance resemblances, and a habit for disregarding and belittling established scholarship. The professor also has an academic background in a completely unrelated field to linguistics. On top of that, I notice that the author usually tries to get his work published in journals which are not connected to linguistics, where probably the peer review of at least the linguistic aspect of the article is less demanding. And of course, just to apparently get on my nerves, he has to mess around with the Anatolian languages, and inside his proposal he has a very unusual use for the Carian alphabet. Now, I'm going to be honest, the reason why this proposal wins the gold medal is because the professor himself actually left a comment on the video I did debunking West Ugric, only to dirty delete it after I had, in my opinion, completely destroyed what he had to say. So unfortunately for the author, that little bit of dirty deleting is what has earned him the top spot. So what is the West Ugric hypothesis, you may ask? Well, it lumps together Hungarian, Hattic and Minoan in the so-called West Ugric languages, which themselves are, according to the author, a branch of the Uralic language family. To give us extra value for our money, the author also throws in some completely bonkers additional ideas like Greek and Sumerian being hybrid languages with ultimately Uralic roots. Now, Hattic is an interesting and clever choice by the author because there are still many aspects of the language that remain debated, and it often finds itself dragged into long-range language family proposals because at the moment it is an unclassified language and people seem to want to find a home for it. That makes it an easy target for spurious language family proposals, and the situation isn't helped by the fact that there's not actually many specialists in the field that are qualified enough to call you out on whatever fantasies you're writing about. It's also worth pointing out that the same goes for Sumerian, and therefore it's probably no coincidence that Sumerian has featured frequently in this video so far. In the actual evidence presented to link Hattic with the other West Ugric languages, the author makes a newbie mistake by actually mixing in Hittite terms, not just Hattic ones. This is probably because the Hattic material that the author was analysing actually comes from a Hittite text, as in it's quoted in a Hittite text, and of course that's a rookie mistake there. The vocabulary comparisons themselves are ludicrous and easy to dismiss. The author frequently ignores evidence from other Uralic languages when reconstructing his West Ugric forms, once again completely disregarding the vast body of evidence and careful reconstruction work that already exists for Uralic. And then there's the Minoan material. You have to remember that Minoan is still undeciphered, or it's considered that way by the community. We can say some things about the script that it employs with reasonable confidence, but ultimately we don't know everything, and we don't know the underlying language that is represented by the script. Yet the author tries to translate Minoan by applying a character similarity algorithm that matches linear A signs with other scripts on a limited number of features. So basically what he does is he takes linear A signs and uses an algorithm to find signs in other scripts that look the most similar. Ultimately, the author's analysis can't tell you whether the similarities it finds are meaningful or just coincidences. And that's because the author considers a vanishingly small number of features in the character sets. So small that there's bound to be coincidences. This is compounded by the fact that the way the author does his analysis, he compares his output, which again is mega limited in and of itself. The author compares this output only with Uralic language family data. What that means is whatever output he gets, he's only going to find comparisons with the Uralic languages because they're the only languages he's actually comparing his output to. He's kind of working on the presumption that the Uralic or Proto-Uralic is the ultimate ancestor of Minoan, and therefore we must be able to use Uralic etymologies to decipher the Minoan. This methodology, combined with how little we actually know about Minoan, it means that the odds are stacked overwhelmingly against any of these translations having any grounding in reality. What you end up with, again, is what you have seen in previous proposals that we've looked at today. Some similarities which honestly don't even look good on paper, and they definitely don't look good when you give them even a little bit of scrutiny. Now, there's much more to the author's proposals than what I've presented today. It's well worth checking out some of the papers if you're interested in outlandish language family proposals. If you don't have the time, energy or inclination to do that, fear not, because for an in-depth breakdown, I already have an hour-long video somewhere on my channel that you can go and check out. So there we have it. These are my top 3 spurious, outlandish, bonkers language family proposals that I've come across. The most important question now is, do you agree with my choices for bronze, silver and gold? Have I overlooked any outlandish proposals? Please do let me know in the comment section. I've been Learn Hittite. As always, you've been fantastic. Please give this video a like and a subscribe if you haven't already done so. It does help with the channel. I'll be back very soon with a video reviewing this book by Jean-Paul Demoule on the Indo-Europeans. Should be interesting.